Hi everyone. In this clip, we're going to start dealing with a few more complicated objects and start dealing with a few more advanced tools inside of ZBrush. So what we've got here is our basic little weird head model, nothing too complicated, just trying to block in some interesting specific shapes. But I do not like this material for one. So let's actually start with something a little bit better. Let's just click our material palette here, and we get a whole bunch of different options to work with. One of the ones that I like to work with is either soft plastic, which I tend to find has a really nice shape to it. Now, if I change the color of it, which I can change over here, it works a little bit better than it would otherwise. But what I can also do is start to work with the just basic material and just brighten that up. And this tends to be a really strong sort of capturing of what kind of shapes we want to work with. So that's pretty good. So what we want to start working with in this case is to start refining some of the shape a little bit more. So for example, we could use things like a neck on this guy because we only got a head. But how do we do that? Well, I could start to try to pull this out. Let's use our move brush and start to pull some of this shape out, but it's a little bit hard to get a grasp on and a little bit tricky. So what I could do is if I don't want to pull everything else, like if I start to pull this, it's not going to work. Well, I can start to use masking. If I hold Control, I get access to my mask tools, which again, we just see it change up here in the same way that if I hold Shift, it changes, Control changes as well. So I can start to select this with my masking. What that's going to do is turn it to this darker sort of tone. I can hold Control and Alt to remove any of that information as well. Now, if I start to try to brush anything on top, it's only going to happen outside of that space, which is not what I want in this case, so that's going to be a little bit hard to deal with. How do I work with this? Well, hold Control and just click on the empty space outside of your model. And it's going to invert your selection, no matter what you're working with. So for example, if I just click again, it's going to make all that disappear. If I click and drag into that empty space, it's going to remove anything that I've painted in. So again, if I do this, click and drag into the empty space, it's going to get rid of it. It is, however, not going to create the Dynamesh unless I do this again, and then you'll see that it does the Dynamesh option. So that's fine. I'm just going to, again, select right through the center here with my masking. Get the kind of detail that I want here. Invert with Control click, and now go to my move brush, sort of pull this down from the center, and create this kind of neck shape. That's pretty good. That works pretty well right away. Now I could continue moving and adjusting with any of these kind of tools, but you'll see I don't have a lot of polygons here. Again, all I need to do is click and drag with Control, and I will re-Dynamesh. So that's pretty good. So I could, of course, select this section again if I wanted. Control, click, invert, and I could start to pull this out and start to just adjust the shape here to create a little bit of a fake head. Now, if I wanted to start maybe extending that neck a little bit more, so I just wanted to give it a little bit more distance, I could start to do that. Now, I could use the move brush, but maybe I want something that's a little bit heavier duty, something that's going to give me just a little bit more work done right away. Let's just undo there, Control mask that back out. So what I could use is my Transpose tools. So if I go up here to move, I'm going to immediately start seeing these little dots appear. Now the Transpose tool is incredibly powerful. It is also incredibly finicky and tricky to figure out. So what happens is if I click any of these points, it's going to be a little bit confusing as to what's happening. If you click any other point, you're going to see these things just show up in all sorts of different locations. The Transpose tool is a pain to work with when you start off, but it is very powerful. So let's just click and drag while holding Shift. It's the easiest way to work with it. Click on any point and then drag down wherever you want, but hold Shift. Now what that's going to do in this case is lock it to your camera perspective. You'll see here as we rotate around that it's locked to wherever I was looking. If I go like this, even into an empty space without holding Shift, it's going to do basically the same thing. Now it's locking out to that angle. If I click and drag from one point to another, it's going to actually connect to the surface of my mesh, wherever I was starting from and ending. Now, what does this do? Well, basically, it's just going to allow me to move in any kind of direction that I want. But you have to click the center point. If I click this further point, then it's going to basically push or skew or stretch my model based on where that endpoint was. So if this seems confusing and weird, let's just look at this in practice. Let's drag down from here to here, holding Shift so to lock it to our camera angle. Now, if I look at any angle that I want. If I just click and drag here, if I push this down, what's going to happen is it's going to push along my view angle. If I hold shift while doing this, then it's going to push along the direction of that line in space. So just click and drag and it'll push down in that direction. Also, it looks like I have a few little pieces here that I didn't have selected properly. I'm just going to make sure that I Control-Alt-Shift or Control-Alt-Drag over top of this, there we go, to unmask anything that was not properly set up there. Again, just to get back to the edit mode, just press T a few times. You can see any of the options here available right away. So if I wanted to get to this, I could press W, and I would quickly get to my Move tool. Again, I can hold Shift just to push that down along that angle, just to give a little bit more space here. So that's pretty good. I'm going to press T again. It's going to put me into draw mode, and I'm going to press T one more time, and it'll bring me into edit mode. And that's exactly what I want in this case. So now I'm going to just Control, click and drag to reDynamesh, and I get access to all that stuff again. So in this case, I could start to just click and drag over top of all these areas here to get the kind of information that I want. And then if I wanted to use something like scale, I could basically just find a center point to work off of, Control click, and then scale out from here. Now you can start to work with the scale brush. You're basically working with these end points instead, and you start to just push those out. Then I can go to my move brush and just kind of pull it down through the center point. Generally, move brush works well from the center and less so through the edges. Now there's a lot more complexity that can happen with the transpose brush, but we'll kind of come into that as we go, just because it is so complicated to begin with. If you wanted something that's maybe a little bit more simple sometimes, we can go down to our deformation tab here. Just click that. It'll open up. Now, what we can do through here is change other things as well. So for example, if we just look through here for size, this will also increase the size of this shape, basically just pushing out from that point. Now you can also use things like bend. Let's turn off our symmetry for that though. But generally these tend to act a little bit weird in certain cases. These pieces up here, a little bit harder to deal with at the moment, less obvious. Offset's going to push in a certain direction, either the y-axis, which is front and back in this case, or z-axis, which is up and down for us in this situation. Generally speaking, I'll play with these on occasion depending on what I'm working with, but most of the time size is the one that I find very useful, and inflate. Inflate is very useful in many situations because it'll just kind of push things out and make things a little bit softer. So again, I'm just going to kind of soften this out here, speaking of which, and I'm going to use my clay buildup brush again just to kind of reinforce some of the general structure that I may have actually wanted here by just building in some basic musculature, connecting certain parts here, and smoothing things out. I could use the dam standard here to just kind of cut in some big muscle elements if I wanted to have them just kind of read a little bit better than they did before. That's pretty good. Move brush to just kind of push things out. Ooh, I'm using the wrong kind of move brush here. There we go. Generally speaking, I try to use the same move brush most of the time for most of the pieces that I'm working with. There we go. And just light movements of these pieces will get you a lot of the distance that you need to go. Now, lastly, I could start to use different types of subtools. So for example, up here, we've got our subtool palette. Our subtool palette is basically just adding extra tools into a bigger tool. And those become subtools. So for example, let's just scroll down here to append. And if I append in something, such as a sphere, I'm basically appending in an actual big old sphere inside of this object. Now, I can't seem to edit it right now. That's because I need to click on it over here to be able to access that. So in this case, that works pretty good. But I'm going to use my transpose tool with no selections to just kind of pull this over to the side. I don't have symmetry turned on. So that allows me to kind of push that over there. And I'm going to drag my cursor out here. I'm going to go to scale and start to push this in. What that's going to do is scale this down. I basically have to go right to the middle point, or this bottom section here, from that outer section. And that will allow it to keep scaling down. If I go back past that point, it'll start to get big again, which is not what I want. So you just kind of have to redo it over and over again. Not a big deal, but I will use the move to squeeze this in. That's pretty good. And basically what will happen is actually let's just move that here through the center point over here. And now I can start using things like my move brush to kind of start to block in an ear shape in a much more manageable way than I might have had done otherwise. So there we go. Now I can start using my sculpting brushes. Let's just use standard. There we go. And I can start to just block in some of this basic ear shape. There we go. And build out some of that general structure a little bit more easily than I was doing before. Again, we'll just use that move brush, pull that down, and make just a really kind of clumsy ear that I can start to work with. And that stays separate from my model. If I want to click the rest of it, just hold Alt, click the other part of your model, and you'll switch subtools into something else. So that works great for me. In our next clip, we're just going to go into a few more techniques that we can use inside ZBrush to start creating some really compelling concepts.